You're live.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Noble, and this is my co-founder, Rouse. And we run Advantages of Age, an online magazine that we created to challenge the media narrative around aging. And why are we sitting in a hot tub talking about death? Well, actually, the magazine that we started came out of many, many discussions that we had in a hot tub. Rose and I meet on a monthly basis with our friends, and mostly they're women in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and we talk about all sorts of things, and we realized that the conversations that we were having weren't really the conversations that were being represented in the media, and we set out to change that, and we created Advantages of Age. And therapist, fantastic cook, Caroline Bobby, and Patrick Walter, who calls himself the soul midwife. And we're here to talk about a subject that's very taboo. We're here to talk about death. And when I mentioned to my mum that I was actually going to be doing this and talking about death, she wasn't very happy about it. And as it turned out, most of the people that I spoke to weren't very happy about it either. And they just became really uncomfortable when talking about the subject. And that's really what we're here to discuss. Why is it so provocative and why is it so taboo? So to lead the discussion, I'm going to hand over to Rose.
So I just want everybody to introduce themselves by explaining what death means to them with death. So we're going to go round everybody and start with Patrick, so he will explain.
Been fascinated by our mortality and the relationship between this life and the life after or before since I was a kid, really. And I've always sensed, although I'm partly a musician by trade, that this was going to be one branch of my work. For me, I think I see death as a homegoing. I think I see it as the taking off of the blindfold a little bit, and of rest and restoration after the hard work of a human life. That's sort of the way I see it. But of course, if I'm working with someone, then I'm interested in finding where their belief system is, what their belief system is, what their language is, and what they're comfortable with, because that will always decide the terms and determine the terms on which we work.
Patrick, could you just explain what a soul midwife is to everybody?
A soul midwife is somebody who brings care that is neither family nor medical to the support and service of somebody who's approaching the end of life, and actually during the end of life and sometimes beyond as well. We have many different sorts of skills. Although we've all had the same training at the Soul Midwife School in the essentials and the important stuff, we tend all to have some kind of background in complementary therapies as well. So there will be people whose soul midwifing is very down to earth and practical and day-to-day support of cups of tea and cozy blankets and making the room nice and flowers and massage. There will be people who are quite medical and accustomed to advocating with nurses and doctors and live in a medical institution. There are people who have all sorts of wonderful complementary therapies or body work. There are people who work with sound and sound bowls, people who work with essential oils and essences. There are people who are quite spiritual in their work, and other people who will just sit and listen, which is a really valuable skill for people whose contact with others is either fraught with all the family stuff or is very medicalized. So we bring our own skills, our own selves to this work, but there's a common core of putting ourselves at service of the person.
Oh, thank you. And now over to Caroline. Caroline is someone who describes herself as passionate about death, so I'm really interested to hear about that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, here I am in a hot tub. I think in my life I've come out about a few things over the course of my almost 60 years, and I think the most recent coming out is really coming out about loving death. So that's an odd thing to say, and but it isn't really odd to me. And what I mean by that is that it's death, the geography of death, the kind of the borderland where death happens, feels to me exactly the same place where birth happens, and yet birth has a really kind of idealised sort of image, and death has a really taboo image. And for me, I've been privileged to be at birth and death, and I sort of knew it was the same place, but having been through those two journeys, now I really know it's the same place. And it's a place that I really love being in, because it's very simple, it's very intimate, and when you're there, there's nowhere else to be except there, and I like that. So I guess I'm a bit of a poet and a bit of a writer, so I like the lyricism of death. And the thing about coming out about loving death over the last sort of 3 or 4 years is that something that had felt very taboo for me, there's now this incredible freedom around. So I am the person that brings up death at dinner parties. I am the person that people have sort of woven comedy into the sort of narrative. And I love that. I love that people who know and love me know that I love death and that it's okay. And it's not so lonely. It's not so lonely now I'm able to be who I am around it. So I'm very happy to be in touch, to be here in this hot tub of death with my friends.
Okay, over to Nick. And Nick actually does death mass. He's done death mass of artist Sebastian Horsley. He's done a death mass of Malcolm McLaren. And I'd like to ask him what his relationship with death is around all of that, and how that came about.
Well, like most people my age, when you're 50 plus, you get a phone call every week and somebody you know has died, so that's kind of one level in which I say that, you know, I live with death all the time. The death mask thing was, I came into purely by accident. I was doing an exhibition of famous criminals, and one guy that I wanted to do, by the time I actually got to him, he was dead. And I didn't think particularly very much of it at the time, but when I handed over I gave a copy to his sister, the response that I got from her was kind of extremely rewarding in a way that I'd never got before, from coming up with art on my own ideas and having exhibitions. And it became a vocation of sorts, and something I became quite passionate about, because I kind of agree to a certain degree with the Victorian attitudes to death. You know, that they turn death into a wonderfully gothic, romantic sleep of eternity, which might be a little bit fanciful, but I don't really believe in an afterlife. I'm not religious. I think death is very final, so I'm really more intrigued, not so much in the death, but in the celebration of a life. And I see taking a death mask of someone, it is the final portrait. It's almost as if their very last gasp has been frozen into a three-dimensional form of themselves. And because of that, it's almost as if something of the mystery of death passes into the cast as you're making it. And as such, there's something so much more powerful about a death mask than, let's say, a sculptor's rendition. And when you look at a death mask, every little wrinkle is a repository of a million memories. It can trigger off so much more than a photograph. You know, when somebody dies, there's a massive void, and the space they occupy is gone. A photograph doesn't fill it. It isn't tactile, it isn't tangible, it isn't three-dimensional. A death mask is. And I think the Victorians was well aware, very well aware, that they're tremendous, potent cathartic tools, and having a death mask can lead you one of two ways, but it helps you to accept that the person has gone. And when I say it leads you one of two ways, it can either make you realise when you look at that empty carapace which features someone's features that you're so familiar with, you're fully aware that they are truly gone, and in that respect it can help. For other people who can't accept that their loved one has gone, they've got something they can hold on and talk to until they realise the grieving period is over and it is only a sculpture. But once again, it's done its job in that, and I'm very passionate about that. And being an artist, I think it's kind of very egotistical and very selfish kind of thing to want to do. With the death masks, maybe in my own mind, it just balances up. It balances up things for me. I think it's very, very worthy, and it's extremely fulfilling.
Right. Suzanne, I think Suzanne might want to say something now about her relationship.
Oh my God,
with
I
death.
have to turn around again. I suppose I didn't really actually think much about death for most of my life, actually. My grandmother died when I was in my 20s, and since then, I've lost two grandmothers, and since then I didn't really have anybody that died until when I was in my 40s. I went out with a man who was 44, and I didn't realize until I started going out with him that he was actually quite ill. Oops. You have to turn that off.
Oops,
Turn that off.
Bubbles in the hot tub.
There we go, done. Yeah, anyway, he turned out to be very ill, and over the course of our relationship together, that was lasted for 2.5 years, he basically deteriorated and then died. It was the first time I'd actually really confronted somebody that was my age dying, and it was really potent, not least of which because my children were so young at the time, and it was something that I really wish that I hadn't put them through. But having said that, the people in the hospice and they were absolutely amazing. And I suppose now, when I think of it, there is a part of me that's not so afraid because I've seen it, and so I know what happens, and that makes me less worried about it.
So I'll just speak about myself, and I suppose I have quite a campaigning spirit around death. And partially it comes from my own father dying in 1984 of a heart failure, and the way that his funeral was and funerals were in those days, in that they were very impersonal. A vicar did it and he was an atheist, and you know, it was because it was a community in a village, but still now I reflect that it was nothing like I would have liked for him, and not a reflection of the man that I knew. And then I wrote a piece in Time Out about funerals in the late 80s when AIDS deaths were happening, and how they were revolutionising what was happening around funerals, and that became quite exciting. It's like there became a whole kind of spectrum of things that could be possible. And then I remember my friend Jane Blackman actually led the service for her stepfather, and that was so inspiring because she actually cried a lot of the way through, and there was space for her to cry and then carry on. And at that point I thought that, you know, anybody can do this, anybody can get up so my idea around all of this is thinking for advantages of age for society and for myself around what does it mean, what do I want in that area. And that's the next question that I'd like to put out here is have we thought about our own deaths, and what have we thought about what kind of death would we like?
Well, part of our training as soul midwives is to do exactly that, actually, and to make a death plan. It's something that I'd say the majority of people welcome if they're given the opportunity. There are some who, like one of my family members, would say, "Oh, I don't want to heap my wishes on them, they'll have enough to deal with at that time." But actually, it really saves the family from trying to figure out what Dad would have liked. So I think it's a good idea, and it also gives people the idea that in a situation where perhaps they see very little choice in front of them because they're moving towards end of life, they do actually have some choices, and people's choices vary enormously. It can be, right, I just want to be brought in a cardboard coffin decorated by my grandchildren from the hospital mortuary to the creme, and we'll all do our own thing and make up our own service. That's completely allowed. You don't have to have undertaker services if you don't want to. You don't have to have a priest or any particular form of liturgy. There's a huge amount of choice nowadays, and I'd really encourage people to look into that. For my death, well, I sort of feel that it's important for the people who are left behind as well, and really that once I'm looking down from above, I'll be pretty laid back about the details. So if they're going to feel more comfortable with Anglican hymns, that's fine. So let them. But then my in-laws are Taoists, so they're going to have to negotiate it and work it out a little bit. I certainly would welcome the opportunity of the slog at the end, and there isn't anything constructive left. And I do regret that we are in various other countries in that respect. Around, I'd like to have got my farewells out of the way and not have lots of people to worry about. Yes, I'd like it to be quiet, simple, and not too many people. In fact, I think I'd probably like to be on my own. We come into this world looking forwards, not backwards, and I think most people want to leave this world in the same way. You'll tend to find that people often die at the moment when people are out of the room. And I get that.
Interesting.
Well, I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about my death in a sort of maybe a little bit like some people might think about, dream of a sort of soulmate or a beloved. It's like it's a way that I soothe myself, and it's a way that it's a place, it's a territory, and now that I don't have to make myself wrong for any of that, and now that I've kind of arrived in a sort of much kinder dimension in myself, it's something that I think about a lot. So I know that this is, I'm hesitant to say this live on Facebook, but I do really dream about having a diagnosis of a terminal illness. I know that is not really very usual, but I would really value that, probably because I think God, or whatever God is a bit of a joker. Probably I'll get run over by a lorry and I'll be gone just like that in an instant, and I won't have any kind of experience.
May I ask, is that wish for a terminal diagnosis about having time to prepare and get your ducks in a row and do it the way that you want to do it?
It's partly that, and it's partly the fact that whilst not being suicidal, like having been suicidal and having in earlier sort of chapters of my life being extremely sort of actively suicidal, I took a long time to arrive in life like this. So it's possible for me to love life and long for death at the same time. So partly I want an opportunity to die. I think I'd die well if life gives me the opportunity to have that journey. It might be my best work. But I think it's also the part of me that kind of goes, okay, I don't want to, it's not necessarily, I don't want to be old, I don't want to get old. I would be really happy to live about the same length as my schnauzer, Leonard the dog, which when I'm discussing it with him feels like sort of 10 to 12 years. So, of course, I have no say in any of this, but I'd like to go sooner rather than later, and I'd like the opportunity to go with a sort of a coherent process.
Consciously.
Yeah,
and also
consciously.
a sense of dignity, I think that's the thing, is, going with a sense of dignity.
And a sense of humour.
And humour, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If someone said to me, you've got 6 or 7, 8 yourself and drink prune juice and don't smoke or drink, you might live a year. Bollocks. I'd just go out in style. I mean, to be quite honest, I'd like to go like Sid James or Tommy Cooper on stage performing. I'm a musician. I think it's the best death you could have. My son's great-grandfather, he died hitting a hole-in-one, got a hole-in-one on a golf course and then dropped dead. Wow. Now, I think that's class. That's the way to go. Obviously, I am totally in touch with my own mortality, doing death masks. I'm forced to face up with it. The last 2 that I've done was a 26-year-old and a 16-year-old, around the same age as my children. And I think one of the most tragic things that can happen to a parent is witnessing the death of their own offspring. So even though I'm very much aware of death and it's lurking round the corner, I certainly don't embrace it. And it's going to happen one way or another. Ideally, it would be lovely if I could be laying in a bed with a son each side of me saying, I love you, Dad. But it's probably not going to happen. Could get hit by a bus, the tour bus could crash, or I could just have a heart attack on stage. Who knows? My only importance really is you've got one go and just have as much fun as you can while you are alive.
We have a question from Emma Hartley, who asked, has anyone in the hot tub been present at someone's death?
Okay, do we want to finish this round before we do
Yeah,
that?
so Emma's asked if anybody in the hot tub has been present during someone's death, and we'll come to that question after we go round and just finish.
Yeah, we'll do more of a popcorn thing.
Yeah, cool. So when my partner died, he had a humanitarian funeral. Is what it's called, isn't it? Is that what it's called? Humanist funeral. And I have this, and it was the first time I'd ever been to a funeral that didn't have any religious connotations. And Deep Purple played as we were going into the crematorium, and then it went to Virginia Plain by Roxy Music. And everybody told stories about memories of him when he was alive, which was mainly the fact that, as we discovered, we were all his bank, because he was always borrowing money off of all of us, and he never seemed to have any of his own. So that was a bit of a revelation. But I did think at the time that it was just such a joyful funeral, although we all cried during various points in it, but it made me think about, my own funeral and how I wanted people to celebrate my life and be able to laugh amongst themselves about some of the silly things that I'd gotten up to, and I didn't want to have that kind of very somber religious funeral. As far as dying goes, I'm like you. I just believe that if I get to a stage where I'm a burden to my family, or I no longer am able to, recognize people, I would rather that somebody I just left in a nice way and left everyone with lovely memories.
Okay. I'd say that I'm a beginner in this whole death area, and doing this is making me read and making me reflect more on different ways of dying. So in a way, what Caroline says about the intimacy of death attracts me, and I think one of the things that I'd really long for is a gentle death, and by that I mean that I would not be anxious, that I would have had ways to sort out any anxiety that I would have about going over that threshold, which I'm sure I would be having, and many fears I would seek out ways from people around me to get through those things, get through, like I have, I suppose, in living my life. I would want to go into death in a kind of in a peaceful way, and I think there would be things to get through on the way. So that, and I'm looking at all that I'm reading at the moment about different deaths and changing my mind, actually. So I'm in a state of flux around it and enjoying the kind of state of flux. So over to
I just wanted to pop in a thing about funerals, seeing as you were talking about a humanist funeral.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that can fill a funeral so much with laughter, and laughter and tears can go together,
Yes, of
is
course.
when you have people who've known the deceased from many different angles and aspects.
Yes.
And so people that I've only known very ill, for example, I hear about them dancing at 1 o'clock in the morning in stilettos on the boardroom table of a football club where they were supposed to be a prim secretary. Or
great,
I hear that you know, there was one of my clients, and at her funeral her 2 adult sons discovered that there had been a Mr. Smith who'd been their mother's husband before their dad showed up, and things like that. And we came back absolutely hooting because they organised bagpipes, and she hated bagpipes, and we just could see her, you know, just laughing her head off. So you hear a lot of lovely anecdotes at funerals from people who've known the best of different angles of the person, and it's a great way to wave somebody off, I think. Yeah, the tears are inevitable
and learn
as well,
a few
but-
things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I assume of all the people in this tub that have experienced someone actually departing and been present, you've probably done that more than anyone else.
I've only actually been present at that moment once.
Right.
I've tended to miss it by 5 minutes, quite a lot, because hearing is the last sense that will go. And you will always say to somebody in the room, when you're vigiling during the last stages, you'll say, if you want somebody with you when you go, I'm going for 20 minutes and then I'll be back. But if you want to be alone when you go, you've got 20 minutes when I won't be here. And only once has the person actually not opted to slip away in the 20 minutes that I was out of the room. But that's fine, that's as it's meant to be. But yeah, I've been there for quite a lot of the final hours stuff.
And what are the sort of variety of ways that people have chosen to be with you in those last times, kind of thing? I mean, like touch. Do people, you know, what would people like?
The touch and the therapies and things like that, they tend to be in the period of consciousness, and then very often consciousness declines and begins to kind of disappear, and they've only really got hearing left. So my experience is generally of great stillness and of peace and of a kind of wonderful guarded and I don't mean guarded, protected energy around that person. There tends to be a beautiful atmosphere of stillness, and yes, there are the symptoms of the body closing down. So there'll be the rattle of mucus in the throat quite often, and the hands will start to mottle, and the breathing will stop for stretches. But there tends to be this atmosphere of something rather sacred and special, something mysterious coming about. People will tend to like soft music, people will like touch, very, very light touch. They become extremely sensitive towards the end. People will sometimes like bells or other small sounds. People will like delicate smells, not strong smells. You tend to find that essential oils that are quite potent are too much towards the end, but a little bit of an aqueous distillate, for example, of some flowers can be really reassuring to people. Candlelight rather than natural light, and definitely not electric light. And people tend to find that their interest goes in food and their telly programs and this and that and the other. It all kind of comes to a still centre, and that's my main impression, really, that you're there as witness, to sit in this stillness, not to be busy.
Has anybody else here been with anybody at the time of death?
My heart sister, who I sort of accompanied on her final few years with her illness was, I was with her when she died, and a lot sort of leading up to that, and it was just, it's hard to sort of do justice to that journey with Jan, but it really, really changed me. And at the moment of death, well, kind of a bit like what you said. So she had a lot of community around her, not a lot of blood family, although a very beautiful son, but a lot of heart family. And the last few days there was a lot of us in the room around her, singing and kind of rocking, really. We were sort of creating a cradle, I think. And then for the last night, everybody except three women and Jan's son left, and it was just waiting with her. It was just waiting with her as the kind of night turned to dawn over London, and it was just waiting. And when it was very close, her son got on the bed beside her and just held her and said, when you're ready, Mama, when you're ready. And she just went, and we just, well, it's hard to, it was precious, and it really sort of reaffirmed to me that place, it's the same place. It's the same place as I saw my daughter born. It's the same place. Breath coming in and breath going out. And we stayed with her for ages, like we didn't get the body taken away. We stayed with her. More friends who'd gone came back. It was very precious to do that. I recommend that. I recommend not rushing the body away.
When you say, how long did you stay with her body?
Well, we were in hospital, so kind of hours, 5, 6 hours. Lots of people came. The nurses were really great. They gave us all the space in the world. And we made a really special, we had a cardboard coffin that sort of sat in her house we didn't rush anything, so the funeral wasn't too soon, and the coffin stayed in her front room, and all sorts of people came in a great troop over many days to sit with it and draw on it and paint on it and put things in it and reminisce about Jan, and it was extraordinary to then sort of take her sort of into the fire from that place. It was extraordinary.
I think that people don't think that that's allowed, that people can just lay in their houses and things like that. So how long was that going on for? How long?
She didn't lay.
It was
the box lay, but she lay round the corner in the green funeral house.
It is allowed, though, and
it is allowed.
Undertakers can supply you on loan with chiller boards. It's just like a plank that you place underneath the body or underneath the coffin that will keep it really cold, which means that if you want to have the body at home during that time, that's okay as well.
Yeah.
Well, something that the Catholics still do, that when a loved one dies, they actually have the corpse in a coffin in the parlour, and they will have a celebration of them around the dead body. I've only witnessed it twice. One was Jerry Conlon and the other one was Peter O'Toole, and it was quite a wonderful way of saying goodbye, because I think most people today are so out of touch with their own mortality in the modern world, where even if you're a supermodel aged 23, they will airbrush you and make you look younger. And obviously with the progress in medicine, everyone's life expectancy is a lot longer, and also with so many rich people today, death is something that generally only happens to poor people now. We were talking about Rothschild earlier on. He had nine heart changes, lived to 100 or something. You know, I don't know if I'd want to be with that. I've never had the privilege of see somebody shift from one realm into another. The closest was my dad. When I said goodnight to him and told him I loved him in the morning, he was dead. I think it was very interesting what you said about people tend to go when they're on their own. It's almost like they timed it, and I felt my father timed it to exactly the right moment. And I felt cheated that I wasn't there on one level, but as you said, you're born into the world sort of looking forward on your own. I'd like to see the actual percentages of people that really do die in the way they'd like with their loved ones around. There's a very good friend of my father's. His wife was in the hospital, jumped into bed against the nurse's will with her dying husband and held him in the bed until he died. Now, that to me is such a beautiful, romantic way to go, and there's probably only 0.001% of people who have that wonderful opportunity. In my experience, I generally get a phone call and someone has died under unusual circumstances in the middle of nowhere. So I think that is, I agree that's a privilege. I do agree it's a privilege to sit, you know, but I think there's such a rare chance of anyone being in that situation, perhaps unless you're diagnosed with a terminal illness and people are aware of it.
I think making the decision, you know, making the intention to have a conscious death is part of that. So I would say that's what there's a kind of a growing movement. It feels like there's a growing movement going in that direction. I just wanted to mention, because we were talking about bodies and in being at home, I just wanted to mention that our neighbour Suresh, when he died, he was my car mechanic, and he was like an amazing man on our street. And his family actually invited me and Marlon, the cameraman, to witness his body in their living room and join in. And the women were all wailing at one end of the living room. Basically, the living room had become this place of ceremony and ritual and grieving, and it was incredibly moving. We moved around and put petals on him, and he was just there. He was just there before us, and the men did it first, and then the women did it, and I was so glad that we were invited in to do that. Anyway, we can move now to, you know, any little things that have come out of this.
I was just feeling in contact with the fact that even if I do get run over by a bus with no warning and no time to say a word of farewell or sort of design my last 6 months, that doing this, not just this in the tub right now, but this in my life, kind of talking and contributing my little voice to the conversation about death in this world that I really don't think talks about death as much as it could, or in the way that it could. I think we all live with our death in our hearts, and we're very often, you know, not easy with that. So I feel like if I've got something to offer, it's my perspective and my ease. And in a way, I'm designing my death right now. Whenever it happens, this is part of it. And I like that. I was just sitting here kind of resonating that's true.
Well, that's a great way of taking control of your life, where the only one thing in life you are actually guaranteed of and certain of is you're going to die. Both of those masters, I'm going to cheat you, I'm going to design my own way of going out, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's kind of quite punk rock.
Yes, and that completely correlates with the whole ethos of advantages of age. Yeah.
I'd like to take a real liberty here, because I'm not sitting with a client, and I don't need to final thing, and obviously you do, and I'm going to have to change my ideas about quite a lot, because we just don't get to be right here. This is not what it's about. But if I say that I believe that dying because of death is a conscious state for people. Certainly, I mean, my grandpa popped up in the post office after he'd gone to reassure my aunt, and a good friend of mine, when...
You mean like a vision?
Yes. He just turned up and said, everything's going to be fine, stop worrying, and then disappeared.
But totally visible, or
totally
sort of
visible.
half visible, half
No,
subconscious?
totally three-dimensionally solid.
So that's wonderful. I've been close, sort of lucid dreaming, and woken up and thought my dad didn't die, he faked it. Only to find out after about half an hour that it was a lucid dream. But that really, really interests me. And you weren't on any psychotropic
This is my
stimulants
aunt.
at the time.
My aunt doesn't do psychotropic,
Oh,
I promise you. And a friend of mine was really worried that he had a burglar in the house and locked himself in his room when he heard steps coming up the stairs and walking around upstairs. And it was only in the morning that he heard that it existed. And there are so many instances of that. Another friend of mine saw her mum only once on the anniversary of her mum's death, just appeared at the bottom of the bed. Okay, I'm off now. And animals as well, pets. And they also tend to show up quite often from the other side in the days approaching death. So I was sitting with a client not so terribly long ago who was talking about her dog. And my belief is that, if death tends to be what we want it to be ultimately, and I said, well, I hope my dog's going to be there when I cross over the thing. She said, do you think that's allowed? So we talked about what her ideal scenario would be. And she was thinking hellfire and brimstone, and I said, well, look, if you want to be welcomed by your dog and lots of love and cuddles, why is that any less likely than anything else?
Yeah.
I think that it's actually a time in our lives when that boundary is quite thin, at least for those those who are dying or those who've just been bereaved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I bought an old house up the road, and the previous occupant and the woman next door had set the tap of his cane as he was walking through the house, just this tapping noise. And then when our family moved in, it stopped because we moved into, I like to buy derelict houses, and then that noise stopped. And I'm not, I can actually believe that he might have said, okay, I'm happy now, somebody's occupying this house that loves it and wants to raise a family here.
Yeah.
See, I'd love to believe in that, but sorry to be a party pooper. The mind is an incredibly, is an incredibly potent tool. The brain can fool you, and I'm wondering how much there's an element of projection, wishful thinking. I mean, for many years I did believe there was an afterlife, when there was so many reports about people, they go through the white tunnel, as you're dying, and you get the white light that summons you, and you just feel really great, and you want to go with it, even though if you go with it, there's no return. You can fight it, and generally if you fight it, you come back. There's plenty of medical cases. And so I thought, hopefully that was one proof that there kind of was something, until they did studies of fighter pilots and found out that when they blacked out due to acceleration and G-forces, they experienced the same thing. And it's actually nature. It's your brain just going, oh my God, we're going to die. I'm not going to freak us out. I'm just going to squirt every little bit of serotonin that you've got left in your body that should last you a year, and I'm going to give you a mega dosage. So as far as you're concerned, you're at the pearly gates, you're at nirvana, you're dancing up that white staircase, and St. Peter's waiting for you. But I think,
That sounds
just like
okay,
religion,
though.
it's a trick of the mind. But whatever you believe in is what you believe in, of course. That's what faith is all about. If you've got it, I think it's wonderful. And as people get older, they might have always cocked a snoot at the idea of religion, but as they get older, it's quite common for people to actually question, what if I was wrong? What if there is another chance? What if I am going to be judged by my life? I don't want to go to hell and burn for eternity. But it's all state of mind, I believe. I mean,
I think we do create our expectations up to a point. I think that's absolutely true. And to the extent that people create problems for themselves by expecting judgment and terrible things, and but we could talk all night about that, and
all week.
It's
all month.
indeed, and it's not really what
There's
we're
an
here
hour
for.
at least.
But I think respecting the validity of each person's position and feelings is really important when you're accompanying someone in this process.
No, completely. I think your attitude is a lot more healthier than quite angry that you've got to die. There's an acceptance and a peace that you seem to have in it, which I'm kind of quite envious of. I will die with a raving hump, whereas you're just saying, "Bring it on, dude! I'm ready for you."
Well,
you
not
don't
ready yet.
Not yet.
No.
Something, we had an article in Advantages of Age that was written by Lena, and it was about her accompanying her friend to death, And something that struck me enormously about that was her friend had a tumour, and he decided that he was not going to go further than he wished down the path of suffering. So he actually prepared himself and bought some Nembutal, and at a point in the hospice when he could no longer play his harmonica, he just came to that point where he thought, right, that's it. And he actually found, because it wasn't going to be allowed to do it, so he found an opportunity, and I think he went into
That really was.
He went and did it, and that really inspired me. It inspired me in a way where I think this prepared, but we have to find out the details of this kind of thing. Nembutal, what does that mean? So I've already looked it up and looked at just because dosage, all that kind of thing. Yeah. We need to talk about these kind of nitty-gritty things if we want to be in a community that is committed to dying in a way that we, the thing about the people who are getting older, I'm getting older, but I'm not going to change my belief suddenly and think that I'm going to heaven because I'm getting older. What I am doing is just taking it in and making certain decisions and kind of sussing it out. That's what I feel like is the way for me. And those kind of nitty-gritty things, I think we as a community have to get together and discuss them. How to do the conscious death.
What about assisted suicide?
Yeah.
For example, which has been outlawed, which I think is outrageous.
It is outrageous.
Yeah.
If your dying grandmother says, go and put a pillow over my head, I'm in pain, I'm in agony, the drugs don't work, it's outrageous that you could get arrested for that. Someone should be able to choose when they want to die, I think. I can see why they're a little bit worried about it, because obviously it's a dark area which can be abused.
But you need, in Holland, in the Netherlands, you need 2 doctors.
No, they probably go through it as if you want to terminate a child, so they kind of check that you're okay.
Keeping people alive, medically alive, is just as open to abuse as kind of really echo what you said, Rose. I think I want to be part of campaigning and death community creating so that we can not only speak with more comfort and ease and ordinariness and informativeness. I too know all about how to get Nembutal and kind of how it works, and I think we should all have access to some in our cupboard for emergencies.
Can you give me your number?
I know it's kind of, we're on the sort of cusp of taboo again, but this for me feels the opposite of taboo. It feels like we, to live well, we need to be able to include being able to die heartfully, mindfully, engaged, empowered, loved, lovingly, all that. And I don't think that can happen when it's sort of like split off and demonised and tabooed. So community dying.
Yeah.
Community dying.
Yeah. But also the medicalisation now of dying, and that's what I suppose if I was about being kept alive just for the sake of being alive, and that just scares the hell out of me, because I don't, well, it wasn't really so funny, but I was crossing the road a couple of weeks ago, and a car was coming towards me, and I didn't see it, and my friend pulled me, and instead of going with him, I fell right into this car that was coming towards me. He wasn't like there, but he was pretty close, and I looked up and I could see this thing coming towards me, and it was the first time I actually thought to myself,
I'm gonna go.
I could just go right now, like this could be it. I could just get run over and that could be it. And he was completely freaked out. He remained he said, I'm so sorry. And I said, look, I'm still here. And do you know what? Like, if I'd gone, I hope I would have just gone. And that wouldn't, it would be terrible to, leave my children behind and everything, but it would have been quick. And there was something about that moment. I just thought, oh, if that's the way it happens and it's really quick like that, that would be good. That would be okay. I could deal with that.
Yeah. This is an interesting, it's an interesting dialogue. It's an interesting dichotomy here, because we've got, I've heard at least 2 views around this. So Caroline really kind of saying that she'd like something longer, because something longer includes people and a long wait. And then I've just heard Suzanne talk about a quick death, and I think that is very interesting. What we think, what do we think a good death? It's mine.
It's a very much in touch with his experiences and his responses, and in the days before he died, because he refused to take painkillers and things like that, they started grinding them up and putting them in his food. Yeah. And he knew it, and he said to them, "I'm not right. Somebody's been putting something in my food and you've got to stop it now." And I can understand that, because I would want to be able to manage my own level of lucidity. I don't think any of us would relish pain, physical pain, but we're very adaptable. And I think that not feeling like me mentally, feeling dulled or compressed or very fuzzy would almost be worse than having to organise my response to physical pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think
really with
lucidity is important for me.
Generally speaking, though, if you're in hospital and let's say you're at the last stages of dying from cancer and you're on a lot of pain, in my experience, they will dose you up with so much.
Yeah.
And that's actually not what happens in hospices now.
The last two people that I've been speaking to, they haven't even known that I was there because they were so dosed up on the morphine.
But it may well be that they were just shutting down anyway. It may well not have been a morphine, because morphine only tends to really dull people down and make them extremely drowsy if it isn't balancing correctly with the amount of physical pain there is. And actually, the human being can function quite well with huge doses of morphine if it's correctly balanced with the amount of pain. But there may well have been a choice in those cases as well, because morphine pumps now, they have to you can
self-administer.
There's the baseline dose, and then you can give a top up.
Rocket to heaven.
Well, up to a point. It's limited.
Hard enough.
I think this is really interesting because it is. I think there is a choice. I think we make choices. You know, some of us more overtly than others about how awake to be through our death. And I'm interested in the sort of pain relief morphine sort of conversation because I think sometimes, although pain is being treated, anxiety is also being treated with the morphine, and at some level each person is hopefully able to have some say in that matter. So I know that sometimes there's a sort of medicalisation of end of life, and it's kind of not easy to kind of say, excuse me, I don't want it to be like this, or to have people to help you say that like you would with somebody. But it's I mean, I'm a great believer that I want as little pain relief as I can possibly manage if I'm lucky enough to be, you know, kind of given an opportunity to die the kind of death that I would like to die, because I don't want to miss it. And I
agree completely.
Great topic. Death, don't miss it.
That's a real swizz. You can't be there at your own funeral. I think that's.
Well, I personally feel everyone is, but I should probably.
Yeah, but you know, it's worth actually faking your own death just to watch the funeral. Maybe that's a good way to go. If you know it's on the cards. I'm fine actually.
So I think we're going to say the death hot tub tonight, but I already topics, and I hope that you out there will interact with us more about this, because it is all about this intentionality and creating choice, and how this is another area. I mean, it's one of those words, isn't it? Empowerment, but not that I like it. But around death, that also needs to happen. So we are here.
And thank you so much to Patrick and to Caroline and to Nick for joining us in the hospital.
Talking about death while we're floating in a womb. It's quite interesting.
Oh, God, I saw